Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the pentiment of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka Cybergrind. I don't know, I've never been very good with computers.
that was a good metal dad joke. And I am the black metal guy, aka oppressed by mic settings. That's us. We are the peasantry of mic settings.
You think after doing this for 5 years, we'd be better at the technical shit and we wouldn't be perpetually perplexed by random shit going wrong when we try to record.
The machine spirits are difficult to pacify and ever-changing.
Oh, you know, they've been stirred up by the release of Space Marine 2, right?
Oh, that's true. They're probably furious at us for not doing a Space Marine 2 stream.
Oh, that's what we need to do. Let's just pivot to video games, man. That's the move, right?
That's where the money is.
Or we could do some cool... Let's do some cool TikTok videos about extreme metal.
We could do TikToks with extreme metal soundtrack of us gaming.
Yeah, or we could just have, the TikTok voice be like, Euronymous was a guitarist from the Norwegian black metal band Mayhem, and get like billions of Gen Alpha kids to subscribe. Do you do that on TikTok? Do you subscribe?
Either way, they should subscribe on YouTube.
This is a little one Gash, and you're listening to Terminus.
Alright. And things have come full circle. Ever since starting out this show back in the spring of 2020 with a review of the last Winterfylleth record, The Reckoning Dawn. We are here now with their latest, The Imperious Horizon, out now on Candlelight Records, famous home of Emperor, among others. I mean, in a way, yeah, like, reviewing this band kind of opened the show and set up a bunch of conversations that we kept having after that. And Winterfylleth is a band that you and I have talked about a lot over the years and kind of argued about a lot. Mm-hmm. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, in good spirits, not like real terse arguments we've had about other bands.
Yes, we've had more heated arguments about other bands, but Winterfylleth has been a band that we've always taken seriously and been interested in, and had kind of divergent opinions on. And I think it's a band we've both kind of tried to wrap our heads around over the years, but also been rooting for in a strong way. And I think there's maybe the TLDR for this review is there's a funny thing that happened where back in the day, the death metal guy was a bigger fan. There were certain ways that a record like The Threnody of Triumph didn't really do what I wanted in a black metal record or a pagan metal record or whatever, but it was doing other things that the death metal guy found really interesting and cool. And those were a hard sell for me. And over the years, Winterfylleth have sort of pulled themselves into a more, I guess you could say, like a more traditional kind of black metal band while preserving that original atmosphere. And in ways that have maybe made them progressively more appealing to me, to the point where now I actually really like that old stuff too. Like I'm much more down with the Threnody of Triumph than I used to be. But on the other hand, the death metal guy, you've become less interested.
Yeah, and it's weird. I don't know if it's my personal taste changing or me just sort of like getting over Winterfylleth, or I think that it's also a matter of nowadays there's a lot more bands that sound kind of like this to choose from, and I think that maybe Winterfylleth just suffers from the prototype problem, where they're one of the first bands to really do this kind of thing and make it successful, but now there's a lot of there's a lot of competing bands out there vying for my attention.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it almost maybe has had a yeah, the interesting thing is that you aren't even as excited about their old stuff as you used to be.
Yeah, I was, in prep for this, I was actually re-listening to the Threnody of Triumph, as I do occasionally. But then, I listened to it, tip to tail, and I realized that usually when I put on the Threnody of Triumph, I just listen to, 3 or 4 songs, and then I switch to something else. Fuck, that's a long album. God, these are all such long albums, and when you listen to them front to back, boy, these songs really sound similar to each other, and when you listen to a bunch of these records, you're like, boy, I can't remember any of the riffs specifically. It's just, it's really one of those things where it's like, Winterfylleth really is like candy. A little bit goes a really long way, and I think that I'm just like, I don't know, man. It's weird because I used to be much more passionate about this band, and there are moments in which I still feel the same thing I felt when I first listened to them 10 years ago, or however many. But I don't know. I think that maybe it's just been too many records, and I just understand how the sausage is made a little bit too well now.
And maybe the funny thing, Winterfylleth is like candy, is what I said back in the day. But maybe it's through, on the one hand, this show has exposed you to a lot more Slavic black metal. Back in the day, you obviously knew Druidkin stuff, but you just weren't that into them, right? So you've listened to a lot more Slav black and modern underground stuff that's very influenced by it. So you have comparative references. On the other hand, I, through this show, and through just the direction the modern underground has gone, have listened to much more, have listened to a lot of stuff that I might have found too sugary or sentimental in the past, and found ways to appreciate it. And so you might almost have been like, oh wait, I see what they're doing now, and this is not the best version of this formula. And for me, I'm like, oh, I have a lot more time for some of the excesses of the early stuff, or this band in general, than I used to.
Well, I don't think it's merely a matter of there being better Slav black, because the Slav black thing has always been sort of an aesthetic or a playing style that Winterfylleth has laid over their own melodic content. Because, melodically, Winterfylleth doesn't really sound like Slav black. The execution of it definitely suggests that they've listened to, BBH and affiliated bands, and that maintains through this newest record. But ultimately, I think... You know what I think part of the problem is? Full Franco-Finnish saturation. Because Franco-Finnish black metal is going for exactly the same kinds of kicks that Winterfylleth is going for, just through a slightly different route. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and in some ways it gets there more directly.
It gets there more directly. Winterfylleth, at this point, here's my summation of the new record. It's a really good record, but it is clearly... Okay, we said before we came on, clearly Winterfylleth wants to be the biggest black metal band in the world, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah. And this is, for better or worse, depending upon your own taste, a very vested effort in making that happen. This is very much like Wacken-style stadium black metal to me. I don't even really think of it as black metal past a certain point.
I think you could say that about all of their stuff. It's never been... Maybe the last record was the most black metal that they've done.
Yeah, the last one or the very first, the stuff that's more directly influenced by Hate Forest and, old Scandinavian stuff. So... I have a place in my heart for, the Wacken metal thing, but damn, it's just, in their effort to make Wacken metal but sort of maintain some of their serious underground black metal priors, it makes for some shit that really drags for me. at times. Long songs, long album, and not really enough content to justify the length of either to me.
Well, one thing you liked about the first one back in the day was that for black metal songs, many of these were relatively short and punchy.
Yeah.
Or at least felt that way. And, you really cannot deny the hooks in a song like The Svart Raven or The Glorious Plain.
Yeah.
And even though those are 6 or 7 minute songs, in many ways they're kind of get in and get out riff delivery systems.
Yeah.
Anyway, so so we've done the overview. I had all these notes for like a, intro to the band, and I think we just talked a lot of it over pretty well, but there might be a way of, I maybe should go back to some of that stuff just to set the stage for this.
Sure.
It's, right, so basically like Winterfylleth, like the context for what we're just talking about. Basically, one way you can think about it is Winterfylleth started out, They achieved a pretty high profile early on because of the concept for the band, right? They had this sort of pagan black metal influence at a time when a lot of that stuff was very underground and isolated to Eastern Europe, and a few other places, obviously. But they're especially importing that Eastern European sound to an English context. They had these Anglo-Saxon lyrics, and lyrics steeped in lyrics that actually were in Old English and steeped in Anglo-Saxon lore. And they delivered it all in a professional way that went far beyond a lot of other bands, right? But there was something, from a songwriting perspective, there's just something inherently tricky about what they were trying to do, which is how do you take this sort of textured, droning guitar playing that has this deep relation to folk music that's developed in Eastern Europe and translate it to England and make it sound distinctly English. And I mean, they did that by trying to, sort of write these, as you say, the melodies really are different, right? And they emphasize brighter and sweeter intervals and that link it to music that we associate with England, like Iron Maiden, and the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, which is very Anglo, and also the English landscape itself, right, which is different from the bleakness of the steppe, right? You have racing sun and shadow, right, rolling grassy hills, limestone river valleys, pockets of old forest, but it's in some ways a less it's a wonderful landscape and in some ways more abundant and lush. So the question is how you do all this in a way where you're not just sort of dulling the sharp edge of those Slavic melodies and the tension and diminishing the tension in the harmonies. How do you do it in a way that still preserves the aggression at the core of this music, whether you want to call it black metal or something else? The death metal guy and I would debate this constantly, and it revolved a lot around the Threnody of Triumph. Basically, right, there were parts where just these massive epic melody, one big epic section to the next with a kind of continuity that was often very hard for other bands to achieve, which is really cool. But then it could get, as I would complain, and as you complain now, right, too sugary, too gauzy. They'd get kind of lost. Mercy and Sphere has all this like wanky prog noodling. Mm-hmm. You could hear it becoming. You could hear how it would become Atmo black in other hands. And some of the big hooks sounded as you like. There was always a metalcoreism to them, mm-hmm. right? Which you really liked, and I was a harder sell for me. I could sort of appreciate, but it meant that some of the big hooks had this kind of melodeath indulgence to them that could be really fun, but also sat uncomfortably with the other influences. And it basically meant that there was a clunkiness to the songwriting quality, right? Does it become, on the one hand, too sentimental and poppy? On the other hand, if you try to stick in some harder stuff, are the seams too visible? Like on their first record, there's very visible seams between the more Slav black stuff and like, hey, it's an Emperor riff. Mm-hmm. To the point where they basically dropped that stuff out of the equation for years.
Which is funny because they do. they do an Emperor cover on this one.
Well, yeah, I think a big part of the move they made on the Reckoning Dawn really was, how can we reintegrate the harder edge of the sound? Mm-hmm. Like, now that we've, like, pretty much outlined our sound and our formula, how can we reintegrate the Emperor and Hate Forest aspects? And on that record, it was basically just more grimmer, more storming riffs. Some of them really good. This record, it is more thoroughgoing, and there's like Emperor-style orchestration. But basically, back in the day, there was the compelling thing about Winterfylleth was that there was this. It was a work in progress, right? There was this, and we could hear them wrestling with these songwriting problems that everyone who's tried to write songs face. And in the latest records, they've started to become, you know, to really become become masters of that craft and to present a fully integrated sound. And I think this record is awesome. You do not agree, but
no, not exactly. Okay, like I think it's very good. I think that it might even be one of the best metal records of the year. I also personally resent it. I respect it. It's very good at what it's doing, but I find it kind of obnoxious at the same time, which is a very strange position to be in. I can't think of an instance of this specifically happening on the show where it's like, yes, this is very good, yes, this is accomplishing exactly what it sets out to accomplish, but like could you just pick something like cooler to fucking accomplish? Like Winterfylleth will probably, I mean, they are like one of the biggest black metal, in scare quotes, bands in the world, and this is probably just gonna like push them even higher, you know, push them higher on, you know, their set time at Bloodstock or whatever. But like I feel like there was another path for this band where they could have like created the most fully integrated like Slav black meets metalcore thing. I think there was a way that this band could have stayed very sort of underground while still maintaining their identity and done records that I would have preferred.
And probably I would have preferred too.
Yeah, but instead they've gone what I consider a sort of black and heavy metal route. And sure, they're pulling it off, and I can't hate them for executing on what they're trying to do, but I can be disappointed that they didn't choose something, I don't know, maybe a little harder and a little bit more, I don't like to use the word, but legitimate in my mind.
Well, it's interesting. I feel like in some ways this has a lot less overt heavy metalism than their older stuff because it doesn't set off big riffs in the same way. It's more continuous and textural.
It is continuous and textural, but I would argue that especially after going back to it, like, old Winterfylleth doesn't really have big riffs in the same way, because, like, before we get on, I was saying, like, if you really break it down, most of Winterfylleth riffs are really more like chord progressions, and especially on this record, where the keys are doing a ton of the heavy lifting, which is another change that I'm just, like, not a big fan of.
Okay, the old stuff has marked off chord progressions that work as riffs. I think we could agree on that.
Yeah, that's fair.
If there was if there was maybe something kind of heavy metal about it, maybe it was also the way that often what really counted was the transitions between the chord progressions, which is more of a rockish song technique.
And even old Winterfylleth and this Winterfylleth, all the Winterfylleth, I guess, relies on the song structures being intuitive and instantly anticipated by its audience, which is one of the reasons it's so popular and one of the reasons I like a lot of their older stuff. You know, I like the fact that in the Swart Raven that the breakdown comes in exactly where it's supposed to. You know, and I think that immediate listenability and accessibility and the ability to intuit the twists and turns of the songwriting is one of the reasons that they've gotten so huge. You know, it's immediately appealing even to people who probably aren't that into extreme metal as a whole. But with that comes, you know, how many fucking albums in are we? We're like 7 albums in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 albums in. I would just like a fucking surprise here and there. You know? I just, like, one, man.
I think there are a few surprises on this record. At least, I mean, I think the song structures are more adventurous than their old stuff. And there's some elements I didn't expect to hear. With that, maybe let's go to the samples.
Yeah,
I'll see if I can sell you on it. So, first track basically is, we'll chalk it up for Point the Death Metal Guy. Like Brimming Fire is basically a, hey, we're Winterfylleth, we're back track.
Yeah, it
right?
didn't do much for me either.
If anything, it's kind of weird to start the record with a track where, like, the first riff has the characteristic turn. It has such a characteristic late Senko turnaround, it's almost alarming. Mm-hmm. It sounds like the later Druid or the Windswept stuff. I'm like, whoa, okay. It's kind of like, sounds like really deliberate homage, which is a weird thing to do with your first track when it's the sort of, when it's your calling card. But my ears perked up with the second one, Dishonor Enthroned. And to me, this is one of the most sophisticated riffs I've heard from them. It has their identity, but it also preserves a lot of the strangeness of their influences.
Okay.
So we are back to the main riff. And the first version of the main riff does some cool stuff. It has this kind of... there's a very bold, direct fanfare with a melodic sense that you can tie directly to stuff like Maiden or whatever. It sounds English. It sounds Winterfylleth. But the way it's articulated is all from the weirdest aspects of Slav Black. It is this... As it unfolds, it is this kind of staggered rhythm. And the voices are offset from one another in a complex way, like they might be on a Blazebirth Hall recording. The guitars sound like horns in the way they do in Hate Forest, and there's a clear sense of line, which, as you pointed out, hasn't always been one of Winterfylleth's strong suits, right? Yeah. It's often very much been kind of gauzy chords, but this has clearly marked out lead. And they pass the riff sort of from the first guitar to the counter melody. Dom, 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 dom. Sorry, I need to get the key. I can't hum it right now. But I feel like I've gotten worse at humming the riffs as the show's going on. Basically that sort of clearly isolated lead line switches over to the lower guitar voice. And when they repeat the whole thing a second time, the way their leads are sequenced is different on that rep too. Then we get a cool Hate Forest riff. It's like later Hate Forest. It's like an Hour of the Centaur kind of riff. The doom doo 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 doo. And that's cool. That's darker. It plunges off in a nice way. It's sort of like there's a nice dramatic downward descent. They start to do the thing where they layer these like tremolo, drawn out atmospheric tremolo single string stuff over it.
Yeah, it's this like lurking specter of black gaze that's always like been found in the distant camera frame.
Yes, it's an unfortunate thing that happens. It was part of their old stuff too. That was always what I'd complain about, how they'd sort of diffuse the energy of a phrase. Like, you have this cool Hate Forest riff, you don't really need to just repeat the whole, do it 4 times, then do it 4 times again, but this time with this additional riff that makes it sound like fruitier.
Yeah.
So okay, I can see that's a point for you there. Then they do their classic plateau thing, which is just a gesture we've heard 1,000 times before, but is cool. And they start again, that sort of shimmering post-black guitar starts to come in, and you think, oh, are they going to sort of diffuse the energy? Thankfully, no, because the main riff re-enters, and for a third time, it's different. This time, that initial lead voice isn't even there, and you just get the counter melody, and what's up front are the keys. And here you're like, oh, wait, this is really a lot like a big moment on an Emperor record. And I think that was a moment that was... I think even though there's some maybe too predictable moments that happen in the middle of that sequence, I think it's all framed relative to stuff that's surprising and cool.
So, yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of the most active moments on the record in terms of guitar performance. I guess that my counter-argument is that while there's stuff going on, while Winterfylleth is pretty outstanding in terms of, like, hooking ideas together, I don't think they're great at creating an arc for a song. So that was about a 3-minute sample, and all those riffs individually are cool, and they even link up together well, so it's not a problem of transitions, but it is a problem that by the end of that 3 minutes, I think we're still in relatively the same place. Now, I understand that that's, kind of part and parcel of the Slav Black influence, but the thing about Slav Black is that you'll have these monolithic 10, 12-minute songs with 4 riffs, but typically the final riff on any of those songs is something that has been established. There is a sense of vertical construction through this consistent repetition, you know, where at the end of it, you've arrived in a very different place from where you've begun the song, whether that be in terms of mood or melody or what have you. There's a journey being undergone. Winterfylleth kind of writes rock songs to me. They want to hover around the same location. There's a maximalist streak where they want to pile on layers of additional guitars, additional leads, additional synths, and it's very much up to the listener to determine whether those really add any meaningful content, apart from just being sort of like louder and more complex. And I just find myself kind of unconvinced at this point that all the constant addition of variations and additional layers and stuff, all that shit sounds really great on the surface, but it's so hard to get away from the idea that so many of these songs are operating under basically the same chord progression. You know what I mean?
Well, okay, I'm trying to think about rockish. I always associate rock stuff with being less repetitive than metal. Maybe because my standards are metal, like Hate Forest, that is very repetitive.
Rockish more in the sense of, like, we are playing a song that is basically oriented around verses and choruses. We're not trying to step dramatically outside of what's established within the first, like, 45 seconds of the song, you know?
Okay, yeah, and I can see how in, like, a sprawling Hate Forest track or whatever, even just introducing the second riff places us outside the framework of what was established in the first 45 seconds.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that...
If you play a riff for 2 minutes and then you change it, it's a sort of cataclysmic shift.
Yeah, Winterfylleth changes riffs, but they're not really changing the underlying chording.
Okay, yes, I see that. There's a lot... In fact, there's, like, more change in riff with this than you might have gotten on their earlier stuff, but the changes are all designed to hover around a similar place.
Yeah.
Really, what's really there, the main contrast operating there is between the sterner and more heroic melody, and then the somewhat more, I guess, like pensive kind of feel in the middle.
I was listening to this in my car the other day, and there was a moment on this record where I said out loud to nobody in my car, "Oh, Winterfylleth, we're being sad but triumphant at the same time. Oof." Mm-hmm. We're doing the sad triumphant thing. I'm excited.
Right, yes.
I'm being a bitch, but, like, you know, you get what I mean.
I do, and and I can see how the alternation between the more triumphant and the more sad part, or kind of almost anxious part in the middle, is I can see how the alternation between those basically is the verse-chorus effect, if you want to, like, but I think, you know, yeah, a certain stasis of mood is a pretty important part of a lot of stuff we like, so...
I agree. I think that for me... I'll get into it. I think that Winterfylleth is experiencing at this point a sort of, like, disconnect between form and content. You know, I feel like they should either be a Slav black band, or they should be this sort of, like, rockin' extreme metalcore thing that they gesture towards sometimes. I
think they're trying really hard to get rid of the metalcore. They've tried that since the beginning.
But it never really goes away, does it? All right, let's go to a song. Let's go to a song that I like. This is called Upon This Shore. This is the next track after your previous sample. And we're going to go to the end. The ending of this track is Winterfylleth doing Winterfylleth things.
Down
So within the game design concepts, they have what's called the gameplay loop, which is the idea of like sort of the smallest chunk of gameplay that's going to form the sort of atomic element of your game. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of focus on like making that really fun. I forget which designer it was who said something that's like, game design is about finding something that's fun to do in 7-second chunks and finding ways to string those 7-second chunks together for hours. This is the Winterfylleth loop. And I feel like Winterfylleth works at their best in these sort of like 2-minute time ranges. Call, response, setup riff, payoff riff. And that's a great example of that. This is just them doing the Swart Raven breakdown thing, as they've probably done on 24 tracks through their career. Big climbing, tension building, blast section erupting into big, like, halftime double kick breakdown. It's a pure melodic metalcore technique, and try as they might, Winterfylleth has never gotten away from it, which is good because I think it's the thing they're best at. I think that Winterfylleth, I think the 7-minute song average has always been something Winterfylleth succeeded in spite of it, I think that Winterfylleth should be making 4-minute songs. I think that they should be punchier. I think that the sort of simplistic structures are fine as long as we're just setting them up as, big call, big response, straight up, accessible candy music. I think the problem really starts to emerge where they become too ambitious for their own liking. The rock band that's been around for 20 years and decides this is going to be their opera. Except that's like Winterfylleth has had this problem since its inception, basically. I would argue that Winterfylleth's sort of subconscious need or desire to be a true black metal band is one of the biggest problems that they face.
Okay, see, that's different from what you were saying before about like they need to choose the true black metal. I feel like, well, or maybe you're just saying they really do need to just commit to the big heavy metal band.
They have to commit to the big heavy, or they can be, or they can commit to the true black metal thing, but that's going to necessitate them write more than 5 fucking riffs.
Right, or write
either,
or I don't know, or write 2 fucking riffs, but order them at or write literally 2 riffs.
Yeah, they gotta do something. They've got like 1 foot in each now.
I think, yeah. So I think this is I think a big part of the initial appeal of Winterfylleth for you was that it. I mean, I don't want to be like too like putting words in your mouth, but we've known each other for a long fucking time, and that's part of the show, right? We're constantly thinking for each other. I feel like a big part of the appeal was it suggested to you an idea. And the idea was something like, oh wait, this has like the sort of stirring patriotic element of pagan black metal and some of that seriousness, but it also has the punchy hooks of sort of quote-unquote lowbrow genres that you've always sort of appreciated and stood up for.
Oh,
right?
You're 100% correct. The problem is now we have outlaw rock.
Right. The problem is now we have American black metal, and yes. So yes, it suggested to you an idea that of like unifying the highbrow pagan black metal and sort of lowbrow populist Wacken metal, Amon Amarth melodic metalcore, and doing that in this punchy way. And in your head, the songs on the Threnody of Triumph were always 3 or 4 minute songs.
Yes, when they were actually 7-minute songs.
Right, when they're actually 7-minute songs. And I think I don't think like you're not necessarily wrong to perceive them that way. They, in some ways, they are 3 or 4 minute songs that have been stretched to 7 minutes.
There's a lot of just playing the song twice in Winterfylleth's catalog.
So they were. This is the problem that has always been Winterfylleth, is like that they had this sort of. There was this weird, neither here nor there, but in a compelling way that they had back on Threnody of Triumph, and they've been trying to resolve that into a more definite there, but at the cost of this kind of as awkward as the execution may have been on that early stuff, it embodied this idea of a particular new kind of thing. And as they've tried to become more and more like a respectable black metal band, they've gotten further away from all that stuff that made them unique.
Yeah. And really, I guess, I mean, the next sample, which is, both of us sampling from the same song, is, I think, really going to highlight my problems with the record and maybe the places where you think it succeeds also.
Yes.
Which I think is... So I guess this is going to be a really representative thing. So we're going to go to In Silent Grace, which is the climactic epic of the record. This is 11 minutes long, and it's got Alan Averill from Primordial on vocals. So yeah, we'll get into it. On one hand, it's good, it's effective at what it's trying to do. On the other hand, skull yeah, borther. It's there's something so, like, I don't even want to say contrived, because I think these guys do believe in this stuff, but there's something so formalistic and like, well, of course they would do a song like this eventually, wouldn't they? It's we're like ticking off boxes of what we would expect this band to do, which again I guess was sort of always part of the appeal of Winterfylleth. I don't know, man. I don't know if the band's changed or if I've changed, but it's like I listen to this and I understand that it's good and that Alan's vocals are solid and everything, but the gesture just feels so plain at a certain point. It just really does nothing for me. The chords kind of sit in place, and I understand it's that kind of song. And I understand we're doing a tribute to late Bathory, or late Immortal, Beyond the North Waves off Sons of Northern Darkness. But, like, that itself was a tribute to Bathory. And at this point, we're so many Xeroxed images down the line, it's hard to really feel anything when you hear this stuff, at least for me.
Yeah, well, I don't know, man. I thought this one was awesome, and a significant change for the band. It is definitely the kind of thing you would think they would do eventually, but I feel like at least for a certain kind of band, that's kind of the whole point, is that you go on and you do the things that people sort of thought you were going to do, and they're cool, right? There's like, every band kind of throws out a possibility space, and then as they go, they fill it in. I mean, it is interesting that they've waited this long to do a song like this, which is maybe a good thing, right? But I think So I think we hear this in pretty different ways. On the one hand, I know you're hearing it as like the arena metal ballad. I think it does sort of fill that niche, but I think structurally it's pretty different, which my sample will get into. And in terms of genre, okay, I hear the affinity with Bathory, especially because of the way the track opens, the sort of clean guitar that opens the track, which your sample started past that.
Yeah.
But not really with Beyond the North Waves.
Well, no, it's definitely One Road to Ace of Bay, though.
It's more like One Road to the Ace of Bay. It's like the doomiest parts of Bathory.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm going with this. This is not... I think this is it's not a folk black ballad. It's an English doom song in the vein of the Peaceful Death Doom or the more sort of British funeral doom stuff like Pantheist. I think this has some of the stasis you're hearing reminds me of the kind of like... tortured openness of Pantheist.
Yeah.
How it and this is why they have Alan doing vocals. This is a common root between Winterfylleth and Primordial. Really, I mean this song should have been on the last Primordial record. Or they should have had more like this. They are tapping into something that they haven't really accessed before, which I think is important. An old friend of mine said something to the effect that maybe the problem with Winterfylleth is they don't have enough influences.
That's interesting.
And a similar question would be, related to that is how do they take this sort of guitar format that they've imported from Ukraine and apply it to, make it English? What's their route to the English musical tradition in a more direct way? And, I mean, back in the day, right, it was, hey, it's English black metal that isn't Cradle of Filth, right? Now, you and I can point to a few other important names from that time, like Forefather or Ildra or whatever, but Winterfylleth were by far the most high profile. And what they missed there was the link to Britain's real analog to black metal, which is Peaceful Death Doom.
Yeah.
And here and that's always been like waiting for them to access. Here they do. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think they do this in part because I think Mark Deeks has taken a more and more prominent role in the band. He's the keyboardist, backup vocalist guy who joined in 2014. He's got another project that I've never really heard called Ard, which is it's a funeral doom band about I think Northumbrian monks, hermits, and I think he's bringing a lot of that into Winterfylleth, and it helps ground the other stuff in an English musical tradition. I think what's important about this song is it does have an adventurous structure in the way that you would want a funeral doom song to. And while the chords are pretty static, we don't have any of those like big Winterfylleth chord riffs, it has really cool lead work, which is a thing that has often been lacking. Like there are a lot of leads on Winterfylleth records, but they're often pretty baggy. This has clearly defined, mournful, elegant leads in the Peaceful tradition. So let's continue the sample with let's continue in Silent Grace. We're just going to pick up right where the death metal guy left off. right, so we leave off there with a vocal trade-off, I think, between Chris Naughton and Alan there. But structurally, we start that sample with a big lead, and opening up and doing it in this doomy way that's more solemn allows you to throw literal Iron Maiden leads into Winterfylleth songs, which has been a thing that was not permitted by the formula before, but is kind of I think a thing that would be good for them to do. So they have this sort of slowed down, mournful Maiden doom riffs of the Peaceville school. And then that builds to a huge mid-song lift where, although in contrast to the stasis of some of these other songs, there is a new riff. It's this big sighing, kind of romantic funeral doom riff. It works at a slow pace through the shift of chords. And I think it's stirring and awesome and pretty surprising. And then it drops into a new riff, right? This is not recapitulating the beginning, and it is a much more sort of brooding funeral doom or death doom riff where you have almost the sort of the dark wave influenced guitars there doing the sort of ethereal 4AD kind of arpeggio stuff. But the underlying melody is much grimmer. As solid, sharper minor key than you usually get in a Winterfylleth song. They sort of dig in there. I think it's cool. Another thing worth pointing out is that even during that big sort of tectonic lift in the song, there is the bass is actually still tremolo picking in a way that shows a lot of detail. There's the bass is subdividing in a way that makes it a lot heavier. I don't know. I think this song is executed really well and is a thing they always should have done. I think if there's maybe a thing we could say to criticize it, I feel like the form of the song is clearer in the version where they just have Alan singing on his own, and I wonder if they could have they put that at the end of the record. I wonder if they could have just committed and put it in the middle.
ladies and gentlemen, we are back with a fun comeback record by a band that I've liked a long time, but have never really talked about on the show. This is the newest full-length album by Darkmoon Warrior, titled Graveyard Planet, out now on Folter Records. Darkmoon Warrior are a band that I've liked a long time. I had probably heard them a little bit back in the day, but the way I really got acquainted with them was through a performance they did at Under the Black Sun in Berlin, probably 2014. This is a concert that I've referenced many times as being a huge influence on me. Didn't really know who these guys were. But they got on stage, and the vocalist had a custom mic stand that looked like it was made of metal bones with a big nuclear radioactive symbol. So I was immediately in love. Yeah, I mean, and you can just see the aesthetic of this band is very clear. Their third album was titled Nuke 'Em All. I bought a T-shirt of theirs. I think it was for their first album or something, and on the back it says unsophisticated black metal very proudly. So you get the idea immediately. Darkmoon Warrior are a band. They're kind of a nowadays band. Their first album came out in 2006, but the vibe here is resolutely old school. And not old school so much in the sense of repeating the riffing styles or the aesthetics of previous bands, but more in the sense that it's a little bit unmoored from genre. While this is a black metal band, there's a lot of punk and a lot of thrash, a little bit of rock and roll. Some people call these guys black thrash or black and roll, but I think it really just harkens back to a time where black metal bands just made more dynamic songs, and the vocabulary of the music wasn't as firmly established. So Graveyard Planet is the first record in 5 years from these guys, 5th full-length overall, and I immediately fell in love with it when I heard it. I had no idea they had a new record coming out. They're not a band that fixates on self-promotion too much. If you look at a picture of these guys, it's boy, those are some German black metal guys.
Yeah.
But the record is a ton of fun in a year where we haven't really covered a lot of just fun ass-kicking party music. This might be the first Satan Has the Fastest Motorcycle record that we have covered of the year. I am a giant fan. I think that it is just so easy to recommend for a drinking beer and partying with the metalheads kind of atmosphere. Black metal guy, you're not as sold on it. What do you think of Graveyard Planet?
Yeah, I mean, I basically don't like it.
Okay.
I think 50% of the stuff you bring on as party black metal I like, and 50% I don't. Mm-hmm. I think however, I will say it all comes down to what you think about lyrics we are Darkmoon Warrior and we don't give a shit.
I think they're awesome. We are Darkmoon Warrior and we don't give a fuck.
Sorry, we don't give a fuck.
It's the coolest line ever to me.
Right. Yeah, to me it's I think a problem with this record is that the lyrics are so upfront. They're very it's you have to hear them. Because of the sort of rock, black and roll sort of production. Mm-hmm. And it puts the concept of the band in your face, where I feel it becomes a little they're doing this kind of late 90s, early 2000s trenchcoat era nihilism thing, say a band like Avsky did, or I assume one of the major influences here is, as we'll get into, Impaled Nazarene.
I think that's the primary one all the way.
But it feels like they're kind of missing the point. I'm sure not in their lives, but in the music. There's this the lyrics are constantly just like, we don't give a fuck, we don't care about anything, we hate everyone, we want everything to collapse or whatever. This is missing the point. Impaled Nazarene liked all of this nihilistic, chaotic shit because they liked it. They didn't like it because it was meaningless, or they thought that's where the meaning is. Like, what is cool is like beating people up and fucking and destroying yourself with drugs. And it was related to a more sort of positive vision, right? They were part of their sort of, they had this hostile gang mentality, which was related to the fact that they were very in-your-face Finnish nationalists. Mm-hmm. There was a positive vision being put forth. It was just extremely antisocial. And of course, we can all casually call that nihilist, but like it was more just like in your face. And because it had elements that some people see as apparently conflicting, right? They're in, as we talked about with Tsatagua, right? Impanaz are into the pervert stuff, but also the military discipline stuff, and it can come off as nihilistic because they're just saying crazy transgressive shit, but the point is they're into both of these apparently conflicting things at the same time. I feel like this is a pastiche of that kind of generation of stuff, and it's just like, to me, it's just kind of like depressing to listen to, I think.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's like burn it all down, right? Impaled Naz, tons of old black metal bands wanted to burn it all down, but for reasons. This is, I understand that these are really like throwaway lyrics written in the studio, probably, but there would have been a way of producing the record where I just wouldn't have to like reckon with this aspect of the band at all.
That's really interesting to me, because I feel like this record strikes me as like totally high-flying, life-affirming stuff, really, because it's like, yeah, lyrically, it likes to tread in a sort of like deliberately juvenile nihilism, but like, I don't know. It's like, we also have to keep in mind that these are guys in their 40s doing it, and I think that in many ways this is I think that this album and this band as a whole is a direct response to nowadays black metal, and what they probably perceive as a sort of excessive self-seriousness or pretense on its part.
Yeah, that's fair. It does stand in a pretty serious contrast to the po-faced earnestness of the last band.
Yeah, and I think additionally, what it's really saying is this is not so much, the lyrics are not supposed to be taken so much as like a call to action, like,
I didn't take them as a call to action. They just sound dumb.
Okay, that's fair. That's
fair. Really sort of dumb in a way that is not cool. It doesn't succeed in being dumb cool.
I gotcha. It's dumb cool to me, I think, specifically because, one, there is so little of this now, and two, I think there's something to be said for these guys attempting to recapture the things that got, guys like us excited about black metal in the first place. Sure, we can talk about the link to pagan heritage and sophisticated song structures and stuff, but I'm pretty sure there was a big part of it that was just like, oh, fuck yeah, they're like talking about the devil and they're talking about nuclear war and shit, There was a surface level aesthetic that drew us in to begin with, or at least it did for me. I don't know about you. You got into it a little bit later, you're in your later teens. I was in my earlier teens when we got into this kind of music, but I remember, the first time I heard Gorgoroth, yeah, I was blown away by the songs, but definitely what got me was just the sheer austerity of it and the commitment to the bit, And I think that this is a record that tries to recapture some of those initial feelings that you might have about black metal, the excitement of a young guy getting into this music for the first time.
Well, I think I was interested in, obviously, the transgressive and antisocial aspect of it, but for me it was always that lowbrow aspect of it was always connected to the more highbrow stuff. I think that was like the huge thing that set it apart for me from like Slayer.
Okay, yeah, no, I get that. That's fair.
You know what it is? I think you wrote in your notes, maybe this is a thing more for death metal guys, perhaps after you heard some of my criticisms of it or whatever. I think that might be true. It's like there's a... I guess here's the criticism I have of it sometimes. It feels a bit like, yes, I get that it's drawing on this sort of teenage transgressive element of black metal. It feels a word people use not in metal criticism so much, but like it feels Flanderized, right? This is a little bit like, I know that this is a... I don't want to commit too hard to this because I know that this is your hatred of Razorback Records runs really deep. But this seems to me a little bit like doing to black metal what the Razorback bands did to death metal.
I think that's fair, except that these guys have been around for over 20 years.
Right, whereas you think the Razorback Records were kind of like Johnny Come Lately.
A lot of those were dudes just doing something.
Right, some of them were from the punk scene, I know.
Yeah, and some were from the punk scene. Darkmoon, but I think that Darkmoon... I do believe that what I wrote there, that this is maybe more for death metal guys. I get the sense that these guys listen to a ton of, like, death metal and grind.
Yeah, and thrash. Yeah.
And especially because these are going to be older guys. So their first demo did come out in 96, but it took 10 years for them to get a full-length out. And as far as I've seen in the German scene, from, when I was living there, there's not as much of a distinct kind of black metal guy there. I mean, there's some, of course, but largely you're more of an extreme metal dude broadly. And pretty much all the guys that are into black metal are also into, like, German death metal and grindcore. Think about bands like Blood and shit. So I think there might be a kind of difference in community. And that, yeah, maybe this has the immediate appeal to death metal guys because this is executed so far from death metal. Where, we've seen that, like, a lot of the black metal you like... historically tends to be stuff that brushes along the edges of death metal, or at least incorporates big chunks from it, whereas some of my favorite stuff is the stuff that's furthest away from death metal. Just because I listen to so much death metal, I'm not really trying to get the same kicks, typically. So I wonder if that's part of the issue here.
Well, I have some thoughts about it, but let's listen to listen to the first track, because I will, believe it or not, I will say some positive things about this in the end.
Well, the first track is just the most fun song of the year. So. All right, so let's listen to the opening track, Thy Satanarchists, and of course we're going to play it with the initial sample intact.
I'm not interested in whether you like me or you don't, because I'm antisocial. I don't like people. I wouldn't piss on your face if it were on fire. Literally.
Yes, I wrote in the notes, presented without comment, because, yeah, I mean, this is what a large chunk of the record sounds like. Now, obviously, this is especially high-spirited. This punk stuff kind of maintains through the entire record, but not in as large a portion as here. There's a lot of, like, much more serious and direct, either old Scandinavian or kind of Franco-Finnish riffing, but this song is just so fucking charming. I mean, honestly, I didn't need to listen to the rest of the record. I just knew this is going to be, like, a favorite of mine off of hearing that alone. It probably goes without saying that the predominant influence on this record, and maybe on this band as a whole, is Impaled Nazarene. Like, insofar as this is essentially them doing a play on Ghetto Blaster from us. Which is great. My band covered Ghetto Blaster, and I'm always looking for more bands that that convey that same sort of, like, spiteful, punky black metal vibe, you know, that's enjoying itself, that is, you know, it's spiteful and punky, but it's from guys who can, like, lift a lot of weight. And, you know, it never falls too far over the edge of punk territory, and it never becomes too arty and klaxon recordsy for its own good. You know, this seems like such an intuitive and immediately appealing style. I'm kind of surprised more bands don't play it, but, you know, I'm glad these guys are here to kind of keep that torch burning. But, you know, beyond just, like, the attitude that I love and how fun it is, these are just, like, really solid punk black metal riffs. You know, they're using riffs of extremely varying length. They're playing around with just, like, classic, you know, skate punk chord progressions, but alongside darker and thrashier stuff. I just think it's really charming, and, you know, for an opening track, I can't imagine choosing something better.
Yeah, so every riff there is great. And if the record all sounded like this, I think the lyrics wouldn't matter as much to me. I did wake up, my counter-argument to myself, death metal guy, is that I did, as I was sort of racing around getting ready for the show, I was thinking, we are Darkmoon Warrior, and we don't give a fuck. And I was like, okay, maybe that is cool.
Yeah.
Those riffs are awesome. It definitely evokes the things that are good about Impaled Nazarene. I mean, the first riff, the initial blast riff is good because it's not actually a cookie-cutter Norsecore riff. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of weirdly shaped.
Yeah, it's got a weird shape, interesting textures. They thought about the chords. And yeah, that the sort of the chorus riff is sick. More bands should do that, and it's nicely enunciated here. The articulation is good. They're not like just tremming it, right? Mm-hmm. They're using and they're not playing uniform da 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 either. There's kind of like straight eighth notes at the end in the turnaround. That's super cool. I actually felt like not enough of the record sounds like that. There's well executed, more straight ahead black metal stuff on here, but it doesn't, for the most part, it doesn't appeal to me that much. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking like, you'll have to play me another one of is one of your other ones punky? I guess not. Are the first three, is like Age of Decomposition, Burn Down All, SM70, these are initial songs that go by pretty quick.
SM70 is pretty punky. I think Burn Down All kind of is. Age of Decomposition is more of like a straight up black metal track. I think what they wanted to do, like, their straight punk track and then a straight black metal track and then kind of blend from there. Yeah, I'd say there's not many more, like, songs as a whole that sound like this, but there's tons of parts to songs that sound like this.
Yeah. I think, like, I like I wish the whole thing sounded like that, basically.
That's interesting. You know, I kind of expected the opposite. I kind of expected you to hate the total, like, just good times punk shit.
Well, it's as you say, it's not just good times punk shit. It's like Impaled Nazarene, and the riffing is executed really well. It has the requisite nastiness, and I think there is However, there is one track that, like, we can agree is... There's some very good black metal riffing towards the end, on the second half of this record, and especially in one track, which we both agree is a highlight.
Yeah, so we can go to that right now. This is Omega Legion. This is a much more directly black metal track than a lot of the material. This is one of the, like, fully black metal tracks on the album, I would say. And I think that it's just really well executed. I think that these guys are a great example of sort of full spectrum black metal, albeit one with a more minimal color palette than a lot of those bands that we describe in that way. So let's just, I'll talk about the structure after we listen to it, this first chunk anyway, and I'll give some of my thoughts on why these guys are so cool. It just occurred to me, especially when we were talking about the whole, maybe this is something that death metal guys are more into. Could this be a sort of Euro take on the sort of USBM formula that I've talked about before? You know, when we were talking about Ice, I talked about the idea of how back in the day, if you wanted to do a black metal band in the US, you pretty much, like, had to draft death metal musicians to do it, and just get them to play within black metal idioms, which resulted in something that sounds really different from, like, black metal proper. I wonder if this is kind of a Euro take on that, you know?
I think it absolutely is. I was writing in the notes as we were listening to it, we are fucking nice.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely get which is interesting because these guys, the guys in this band have, like, a very solid pedigree of, like, black metal bands. The vocalist bassist Adam Krieg, he's actually he was the vocalist in Anti, who we covered in 2021, that DSBM group. He's also in Lugubre. He's doing the vocals for Lugubre now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so these guys have a very, like, distinct, like, coal black metal pedigree, but you really get the sense that these are big, like, sort of party time death and grind and thrash guys.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a, it has the kind of, like, punchy production and crisp musicianship you'd expect from death metal. That's a positive, like, I might prefer something different. However, there are positives to that. Like, the double bass fills on this record are placed in a way a straight-up BM band wouldn't do it, and they sound great.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you can't argue with the double bass fills and the tone of that. But also, you know, the emphasis on certain aspects of the original black metal formula that a lot of black metal bands moved away from, like thrash.
Yeah,
right.
The thrash parts, the thrash more thrash influence parts anyway on this record are some of the highlights, really.
Yeah, I agree. It spills out of the chorus into that sort of like into that thrash riff. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's look at the structure of this a little bit. So, it's really interesting the way this song is laid out, at least in this first sample here. So, we open with Darkmoon Warrior's take on the 1x1 riff. Then we get into an assortment of sort of like small riffs that kind of sound like Finnish takes on Euronymous riffs. You know, they have the textured quality of like Shoutrog style, but that sort of just like gloomy half-step dissension of like classic Mayhem. Then we get into that kind of weird, thrashy, bass-driven groove riff right before, you know, you get the big, vast chorus riff. And kind of going back to something you were saying, I think I agree with you that this band is kind of a pastiche. There's a lot of directly referential stuff on this record and across their work as a whole. And I think this is really a case of, like, when you'd originally mentioned it, talking about Satanic Warmaster, this is very much a fan band. You know, these guys sound like they are fans of this music, first and foremost.
I was wondering if there was going to be any way to connect this with Winterfylleth. That is a similarity. Winterfylleth have always sounded like a fan band. It goes with that kind of everyman craftsman's approach to writing that they had. Winterfylleth always sounded like they were a fan band striving to go beyond that.
Yeah. Which is interesting, and I don't know, I'm starting to think at this point that a lot of my favorite bands really are kind of fan bands.
yeah, and I mean, you know, and this it's perfectly fine to be a fan band that embraces that. One thing that this track reminded me of, and I mean, yeah, one thing this track reminded me of was just the more sophisticated German black metal. This sounds like Nagelfar on Virus West or something like that. Okay. It's which is that's a record you would like. It actually sort of, in a lot of ways, it kind of Spite Extreme Wings a couple years before Spite Extreme Wing. It has a more modernist. It has a more modernist sound, basically. But you know, these guys are capable of. They really do have a serious black metal pedigree and the chops to do sophisticated chordings. I know also you mentioned in the notes something about 1x1, which of course it's 1x1.
It's definitely the 1x1 riff.
But they're doing it with this kind of severe and noble chording that you would hear in something like Nagelfar, for sure. So maybe part of the thing that gets me about it is the way that those kinds of melodies are thrown up against the throwaway lyrics. Right? And that can be a bit like that can create some dissonance, right? If it that's one reason I would almost prefer it to sound more like just the Isotanarchists. But this track is impossible not to love. We're just going to play I'm just going to play the rest of the track. okay, that's a cool lead.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than simply following the progression, it starts to introduce more major tonality. In fact, it's almost like a Winterfylleth lead, the thing where you play the riff 4 times and then you introduce a lead over it. But here, there's a contrast effect that's pretty cool. Right? You get you get the sense, okay, here they're pretty optimistic about the apocalypse. It's and you use the major over the minor to create more tension. That's cool. There's not that much else to say, except in terms of like death metal guys reintroducing black metal to its sort of heavy metal fundamentals. I think you could talk about the headbang ability of the chorus, right? They do the, dun 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 dun, and then they keep that thrash rhythm going. They just introduce more sort of like sliding bar chords to bring back some of the texture, but the chorus is extremely headbangable, which is not, unfortunately, something you can't say about most modern black metal.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly an effort here to reclaim some sort of territory, And I think that it's also worth mentioning that I think these are guys who perceive the high-flying punk stuff and the more downcast, serious stuff as not being different materials. I forget who it was. I think it was that sprawling interview with Saleh Frue that I read some years ago, where he decried the concept of DSBM because he said, well, isn't that just black metal? We always wrote black metal about sorrow and suicide and feelings of depression. We had no need to create a term oriented around that specifically. And I think that Darkmoon Warrior are a band who see the high-flying Impaled Nazarene stuff as well as the more miserable stuff as like all firmly belonging to the same genre, with no need of like splitting or equivocating.
Oh, okay, like I can agree with that, and I think I basically just do agree that you have to have that totality to it, but then that comes back to the whole image and presentation. It's like, if it's all one thing, then you also have to mean it, right? Or you at least have to sell that you mean it. You can have lyrics kind of like this, but the whole game, which of course nobody wants to literally detonate the whole cosmos or whatever, right? But you kind of, except for John Nordveit, but you have to you have to sell us on that. And in a lot of ways, if you want the serious stuff to go with the fun stuff, then the parts of this that are supposed to be serious have to sound not just like, okay, with like the track I Call Death actually works pretty well as a black metal song, but it's just like, okay, man, we're summoning Cthulhu. Okay, here he comes. He's gonna eat everyone.
But that's a very death metal thing.
Yeah, but yes, it's true, but if the lyrics had been gory, right? If you had some real gruesome Cthulhu lyrics there, that would be something different, and that would sell it more. There's like a, I think it's the not giving a fuck approach. It's like there's clearly they give a fuck about this music, but then there's other aspects where they don't. And I just wish that there was a little bit more of that. But in terms of this band firing on all cylinders, I think the last track is awesome. I feel like the bookends are the best. It's like Thy Anarchist starts it off, and at the end they have another very short Impaled Nazarene influence track. But this time they bring back all of the much more sophisticated songwriting apparatus they've built up through the record. But they do it in this really compact format to produce something very original, and it almost reminds me of like Axis of Advance or something, how many things are going on in this short track. That was insane. Why can't they do that the whole time?
That really does sound like while it was playing, I said it sounds like Galicia.
Yeah, it was our go-to guys for stuff that sounds like Axis of Advance, except maybe even a little more sort of chaotic and more punkish. Yeah, it was nuts. You introduce that very cool initial sort of chord progression riff, which has an Impaled Nazarene feel about it, right? Very stern, but has a sort of punky immediacy. And then just you light into this lead and then immediately cancel it, or not cancel it in a bad way. You light into this lead and then instead of repeating it or developing it, you throw in something that harmonically contrasts strongly with it but continues the squiggly lead vibe. And then you throw in another kink in the chain and you keep the momentum going. It just ricochets around in this awesome way without losing momentum. And a minute in, they introduce this big, cool new idea. There's an insane density to it. And, you know, it's like, if the Thy Satanarchist doesn't need explanation because it's simple, straightforward, does what it says. I mean, this one is almost hard to explain because there's just so fucking much to talk about, right? Like, it's sick, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, they absolutely have the ability, and I think that it's like almost a throwaway at the end, because I think that they think of it as like, oh, well, this is just a fun one. This, like, isn't a black metal song, you know?
Right. They think it's... So they think that this is the throwaway. I think a lot of the other stuff feels throwaway. This is like... this, to me, feels like they sort of, like, let go of some of the parameters they had and produce something really original and fun. And here, the instead of having this sort of like apocalyptic nihilism, everything is fucked, the lyrics are just about like, yeah, you're gonna fuck her really hard, man. Okay, and you know, they sell that.